Daniel lives off my salary. That was the sentence my wife chose to turn 17 years of marriage into a punchline. Melissa stood beneath a chandelier in the grand ballroom of the Langford Hotel, one hand wrapped around a champagne glass, the other resting lightly against the edge of the company's anniversary display. Behind her, a 20-foot screen glowed with the silver logo of Apex Meridian Technologies and the words 20 years of building the future. Around us, nearly 300 employees, executives, spouses, and investors filled tables dressed in white linen. The room smelled like roasted beef, expensive cologne, and the kind of confidence people wear when they believe they are standing close to power. Melissa had always known how to own a room. That night, in a deep blue evening dress and the polished smile she used during quarterly presentations, she looked every inch the successful marketing executive her colleagues believed her to be. I stood 6 feet away in a dark suit she had once called too plain, holding a glass of club soda I had barely touched. For half a second, I thought she might stop there. I thought she might glance at me, recognize the line she had crossed, and soften it with something kind. Instead, she laughed. "I'm serious," she continued. "At least one of us has a real career. Daniel retired early, which is a very elegant way of saying I pay for everything." The laughter started near the executive table and rolled outward in a warm, careless wave. Some people looked down at their plates. Others leaned toward one another as if Melissa had finally confirmed a rumor they had been waiting to hear. I did not raise my voice. I did not set my glass down too hard. I simply watched the woman I had loved for nearly 2 decades turn my silence into evidence against me. Trevor Blake, the company's vice president of sales, lifted his bourbon in my direction. "Daniel, my man, you figured out the American dream," he said. "No commute, no deadlines, and a wife who covers the mortgage." More laughter. Melissa laughed louder this time. That was the part one remembered most clearly later. Not Trevor's grin. Not the sideways looks from people who had never asked me a single question about my life. Her laugh. Familiar, bright, and completely comfortable. It landed somewhere beneath my ribs and stayed there. I adjusted the cuff of my shirt and looked toward the far end of the ballroom. Robert Whitmore, Apex Meridian's chief financial officer, stood beside a marble column with a leather folder tucked under one arm. He had not laughed. Robert was 58, silver-haired, careful with numbers, and even more careful with words. In the 6 years I had known him, I had seen him remain calm through failed audits, bank negotiations, and one winter when the company came within 48 hours of missing payroll. But now his jaw had tightened. His eyes moved from Melissa to Trevor, then to Grant Holloway, the CEO, who was smiling from the center table like a man enjoying a joke he believed had nothing to do with him. Robert opened the folder. From where I stood, I could see the first page. A column of dates, transfer amounts, authorization codes. My signature appeared at the bottom of every line. Melissa turned back toward me, still smiling. "Come on, Daniel," she said. "You know I'm only teasing." The room quieted just enough for me to hear the ice settle in Trevor's glass. I looked at my wife and wondered when teasing had become the word people used for contempt once an audience started laughing. "Of course," I said. My voice came out steady, almost gentle. That seemed to disappoint Trevor. Men like him prefer anger because anger gives them something visible to defeat. Calm makes them uncertain. Grant rose from his chair and walked toward the stage, smoothing the front of his tuxedo. The company video was about to begin, followed by a speech about leadership, resilience, and how he had personally guided Apex Meridian through its most difficult financial year. I knew the speech. Melissa had helped write it. I also knew which parts were fiction. 18 months earlier, the company had not possessed enough cash to cover 2 full payroll cycles. Banks had refused another loan. Vendors were preparing to stop shipments. Hundreds of employees had gone home each evening without knowing how close they were to losing their jobs. Grant had not saved them. Melissa had not saved them. The money had come from a private investment firm whose name appeared in small print on reports most executives never bothered to read. Carter Ridge Capital. My firm. My money. My decision. I had kept that truth quiet because I had never needed applause for protecting people who depended on a paycheck. I had also believed my wife's respect should not depend on the size of my bank account. That belief was beginning to feel expensive. Grant reached the stairs leading to the stage. Robert stepped away from the marble column. He moved slowly, the leather folder held against his chest, his expression stripped of hesitation. Our eyes met across the ballroom. He did not need to ask the question aloud. I gave him the smallest nod. Melissa was still smiling when Robert began walking toward the microphone. But for the first time that evening, I knew her smile was about to disappear. Robert reached the stage before Grant could begin his speech. He did not rush, and he did not look toward the audience for permission. He climbed the 3 steps, placed the leather folder on the podium, and waited until the technician adjusted the microphone. The room settled into an uneasy quiet. Grant stopped beside him with the fixed smile executives use when something unexpected happens in public. "Robert," he said, keeping his voice light, "we are about to begin the anniversary presentation." Robert removed his glasses and folded them carefully. "That is why I need to correct something first." Grant's smile tightened. Across the ballroom, Melissa lowered her champagne glass. Trevor leaned back in his chair, still amused, but his eyes had shifted toward the folder. Robert opened it and looked down at the first page. Several statements prepared for tonight describe how this company survived its recent financial crisis. Those statements are not accurate. A murmur moved through the tables. Grant stepped closer to the microphone. "This is not the appropriate time for an accounting discussion." It became appropriate when people began taking credit for money they did not provide, Robert replied. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Robert had spent more than 30 years working with numbers, and he spoke with the calm certainty of a man who knew every figure in the room could be traced back to a bank account. Grant glanced toward the members of the board seated near the stage. 2 of them avoided his eyes. A third reached for his phone. Melissa looked at me as though I might explain what was happening, but I kept my expression neutral. She had spent the evening telling everyone that she understood our finances. I wondered how long it would take her to realize she had never once asked the right question. Robert lifted the first page from the folder. From 20 feet away, I recognized the blue authorization stamp in the upper corner. One more sentence would have been enough. He could have named Carter Ridge Capital. He could have displayed the transfers. He could have told 300 people that the quiet man holding club soda near the executive table had approved every emergency payroll deposit for the past 18 months. Instead, he looked at me. The room seemed to shrink around that glance. I gave him a small shake of my head. Not yet. Robert understood. He returned the page to the folder and closed it. The full financial record will be presented to the board at the proper time, he said. Until then, I recommend that tonight's speech avoid claims that cannot be supported. Grant's face remained composed, but the confidence behind it had begun to slip. Thank you, Robert, he said. We will discuss your concerns privately. We will discuss them with the entire board, Robert answered. Then he stepped away from the podium and walked back toward the marble column. No one laughed now. Melissa approached me while the lights dimmed for the company video. What was that about? She whispered. You work there, I said. I thought you would know. Her eyes narrowed. Do not be difficult tonight. On the screen behind her, images of new offices, product launches, and smiling employees appeared beneath dramatic music. Grant's recorded voice praised bold leadership and financial discipline. I watched Melissa return to her table and accept a reassuring smile from Trevor. 6 months earlier, I had still believed our marriage could be repaired without forcing the truth into the open. My mornings began at 6:15 in our house outside Chicago. I made coffee, packed Melissa's lunch when she remembered to bring one, and stood at the kitchen island while she reviewed messages on her phone. She usually left before 7:30, dressed for meetings, carrying the confidence of someone whose name had recently been added to the executive floor directory. I cleaned the cups, opened the blinds, and walked downstairs to the room she called my hobby office. The door remained locked during business hours. Behind it were 3 monitors, encrypted financial reports, and a direct line to Carter Ridge Capital's legal team. By 8, I was reviewing investments worth more than Melissa's department would spend in a decade. By noon, I had usually spoken with bankers in New York, manufacturers in Ohio, and attorneys in Delaware. By 5, I closed every file and returned upstairs before she came home. Melissa never asked what happened behind that door. She had decided that because I no longer wore a badge, drove downtown, or complained about a supervisor, I no longer had a real career. At first, I corrected her gently. Then I stopped. Respect that must be proven every morning is not respect. It is a subscription that can be canceled the moment your usefulness becomes inconvenient. I had not hidden my work because I was ashamed of it. I had hidden my name because anonymity gave me something wealth rarely provides. It showed me how people behaved when they believed I had nothing to offer them. 6 months before the gala, Robert called my private line and told me someone inside Apex Meridian was changing the story of who had saved the company. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I looked through the glass door of my office and saw Melissa's framed promotion announcement hanging in the hallway. That was the moment I understood the problem was no longer limited to a balance sheet. I still did not want them to know who I was. Not yet. The call from Robert ended at 12:47 that afternoon, but his warning stayed with me. Long after the screen went dark, someone inside Apex Meridian was changing financial reports, removing references to Carter Ridge Capital, and presenting emergency funding as a victory created by Grant Holloway. Robert had noticed it first in a draft prepared for the annual shareholder update. 3 pages had been rewritten. My firm had become an unnamed outside lender. Grant had become the architect of the rescue. The money remained real, but the truth around it was being erased one sentence at a time. I sat alone in my downstairs office and listened to the quiet machinery of the house above me. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. Water moved through a pipe behind the wall. Outside, a landscaping crew worked 2 houses down, their equipment rising and fading in the distance. Nothing about the afternoon looked important. That was how most dangerous changes began in my experience. Not with alarms, but with a small adjustment no one thought worth questioning. My office occupied what had once been a finished basement guest room. Melissa called it the cave. She joked that I went downstairs to read market news and rearrange spreadsheets because retirement had left me restless. In reality, the 3 monitors on my desk displayed reports from 12 companies across 7 states. One manufactured medical components in Wisconsin. Another managed freight routes across the Midwest. A third supplied water filtration systems to rural communities in Texas and Oklahoma. Carter Ridge Capital did not invest in fashionable ideas or companies built around impressive presentations. I invested in businesses that made something useful, employed people who understood hard work, and had been damaged by poor leadership rather than poor products. Most mornings, I was at my desk before Melissa reached the expressway. At 8:30, I reviewed cash flow. At 9, I spoke with analysts. Before lunch, I usually approved vendor agreements, credit extensions, or restructuring plans. Some days involved millions of dollars. Other days involved a single decision that kept 50 people employed through another quarter. By 5:30, I shut down the monitors, locked the file cabinet, and went upstairs to start dinner. Melissa saw the dinner. She never asked about the decisions. That evening, she came home at 6:20 carrying 2 shopping bags and speaking into a wireless headset. She walked past me without removing her coat, discussing campaign numbers with someone from her department. I had made chicken with roasted potatoes and green beans. The table was set. Her glass of iced tea waited beside her plate. She ended the call only after sitting down. Long day, she said. Grant wants the anniversary campaign to feel bigger this year. I asked what that meant. She smiled at her phone. It means people with jobs have deadlines. The words were delivered lightly, almost playfully, but she did not look up to see whether I was smiling. I was not. I asked her if she remembered that I had a conference call with New York that morning. About one of your investments, she said. Something like that. That must be nice. Moving numbers around from the basement. I cut a potato in half and let the comment pass. There had been a time when Melissa asked questions because she wanted to understand me. During the early years of our marriage, she would sit beside me on the couch while I explained software contracts and acquisition costs. She did not always follow the details, but she listened. After my company was sold, she celebrated with me in our kitchen using a bottle of champagne that cost less than $20. She knew the sale had changed our lives. She knew I had not simply stopped working. Somewhere along the way, however, my quiet schedule had become less impressive than her office, her title, and the people who called after business hours. The facts had not changed. Her interpretation had. Over the next several weeks, the jokes became more frequent. At dinner with neighbors, she said I had mastered the art of permanent vacation. At her sister's birthday party, she told everyone I handled grocery shopping because I had plenty of free time. When a friend asked whether I missed working, Melissa answered before I could. He prefers supporting my career now. Each remark was small enough to deny and sharp enough to remember. I began noticing the pattern. She never spoke that way when we were alone. She needed witnesses. My supposed failure had become part of the story she told about her success. The higher she climbed at apex meridian, the smaller she made me in public. I could have corrected her with one bank statement. I could have shown her the ownership documents, the investment reports, and the emergency funding agreement bearing my signature. But respect purchased with disclosure would have answered the wrong question. I did not want to know whether Melissa could admire a wealthy man. I wanted to know whether she could respect the husband standing in front of her without seeing a number attached to his name. One Friday morning, I found my answer beginning to form. Melissa stood at the kitchen island practicing remarks for an executive luncheon. She glanced at me, smiled, and said, "Do not worry. I will tell them my house husband packed my lunch." Then she picked up the bag I had prepared and walked out the door. I remained beside the coffee maker, listening to her car leave the driveway. On the counter, her forgotten anniversary campaign folder lay open. Across the top page, beneath Grant Holloway's name, was a sentence printed in bold letters. Through disciplined leadership, Apex Meridian secured the resources necessary to protect every employee paycheck. I read it twice. Then I carried the folder downstairs and called Robert. Robert answered on the second ring. I told him exactly what I had found in Melissa's campaign folder, then read the sentence aloud. For several seconds, the line remained silent. Robert was not a man who filled empty space simply because it made other people uncomfortable. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured. That language did not come from finance. I looked at the open folder on my desk. Melissa helped prepare it. Then she either does not know the truth, or she has decided the truth is inconvenient. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the framed promotion announcement hanging beyond the office door. 6 months earlier, I had ordered flowers for Melissa's entire department when she became Senior Vice President of Marketing. I had stood in our kitchen while she opened the congratulatory messages, poured her a glass of wine, and told her I was proud of everything she had earned. She had kissed my cheek and said none of it would have happened without my support. Now she was helping another man claim credit for money I had provided, while turning that same support into a joke about my usefulness. "Send me every version of the anniversary report," I said, "including the drafts." Robert paused. "Daniel, there is more." He explained that Grant had started holding private meetings with Trevor Blake and 2 outside consultants. They were discussing a restructuring plan that would replace part of the emergency credit line with new equity. On the surface, it looked like an ordinary attempt to strengthen the balance sheet. Underneath, it could reduce Carter Ridge Capital's future voting rights and remove several protections I had required when I funded the company. "They are trying to separate your money from your control," Robert said. "And once they do that, Grant can present himself as the man who freed the company from an anonymous lender." I closed Melissa's folder. Does she know? I cannot prove it. Her department created the messaging, but I have not seen her name on the restructuring documents. That should have brought relief. It did not. Financial misconduct could be measured. A marriage could fail in ways no spreadsheet could explain. I returned the folder to the kitchen before Melissa came home and said nothing that evening. Silence was not surrender. It was the only way I knew to separate facts from emotion. Over the next several weeks, I watched more carefully. Melissa began arriving home later, not because of another man, but because Apex Meridian had become the center of her identity. Every dinner conversation returned to Grant's vision, Trevor's sales numbers, or the anniversary gala. When I spoke about my day, she glanced at her phone. When Grant called, she carried the conversation into another room. She was not hiding romance. She was protecting importance. One Saturday morning, we met our neighbors, Mark and Susan Ellis, at a restaurant near Lake Michigan. Susan asked whether Melissa's new position required much travel. Melissa smiled and said, "It does, but Daniel keeps the home running. He has become very domestic since he stopped working." I set down my coffee. I did not stop working. Melissa waved one hand as though correcting a child over a harmless detail. "You know what I mean. You do not have a normal job." Mark gave me an uncomfortable smile. Susan changed the subject. I finished breakfast without defending myself. On the drive home, the highway stretched gray beneath a low winter sky. Melissa adjusted the heat and said, "You were quiet. You told them I do not work." I said, "You do not have a normal job. You know that is not the same thing." She exhaled and looked out the passenger window. Why does everything have to become a serious discussion? I was making conversation. At my expense. No one thinks less of you, Daniel. I kept my eyes on the road. You do. She turned toward me then, surprised not by the accusation, but by how calmly I had said it. That is unfair. Is it? The car filled with the soft sound of tires moving over wet pavement. She crossed her arms. I have worked hard to get where I am. Sometimes it feels like you do not understand the pressure I carry. I have never minimized your work. No, but you have the luxury of staying home and choosing what interests you. I have responsibilities. I almost told her that one of those responsibilities existed because I had signed a $42 million credit agreement. I almost explained that the salary she believed supported me had been protected by money transferred from my firm. Instead, I asked the question that had been waiting between us for months. Would you respect me more if strangers respected me first? Melissa looked at me for a long moment. Then her phone lit up with Grant's name. She answered before giving me a response. That was the answer. By the time we reached home, she was discussing gala seating arrangements as though our conversation had never happened. I parked in the driveway and remained behind the wheel after she went inside. Snow had begun gathering along the edges of the lawn, softening the shape of everything it covered. Through the front window, I watched Melissa move through the house we had chosen together 17 years earlier. I still loved her. That was what made the truth difficult. Contempt rarely arrives as a single dramatic event. It enters through jokes, interruptions, unfinished conversations, and the quiet belief that one person's value must shrink for the other person to feel larger. I had spent years mistaking patience for strength. Sitting in that cold car, I began to understand that silence could protect dignity, but it could also give disrespect room to grow. 2 years before the gala, Apex Meridian Technologies was not celebrating anything. The company occupied 3 floors of a glass office building outside Chicago, employed more than 800 people, and sold logistics software to manufacturers across the country. From the outside, it looked stable. Inside, it was running out of time. A failed product expansion had consumed nearly all available cash. 2 major clients had delayed payments. Grant Holloway had approved an expensive office renovation while quietly postponing invoices from vendors. By the middle of October, the company had enough money to operate for 11 more days. Robert Whitmore called me on a Tuesday morning at 7:10. I was pouring coffee in the kitchen when my private phone rang. Melissa was upstairs getting ready for work. At that point, she had recently become director of marketing at Apex Meridian, and she spoke about the company as though its future had never been brighter. Robert told me a different story. We will miss payroll next Friday, he said. There was no panic in his voice, but I heard the weight beneath every word. How large is the gap? I asked. $6.8 million for payroll, taxes, and health insurance contributions. Another $4 million will be needed before the end of the month. I carried my coffee downstairs and locked the office door. Robert sent financial statements through an encrypted portal. I reviewed cash balances, customer contracts, debt schedules, and accounts payable. The numbers were worse than he had described. Apex Meridian did not have a bad product. It had a leadership team spending future revenue before that revenue arrived. Grant had assumed new sales would cover old mistakes. When those sales slowed, the entire structure began leaning at once. What did the bank say? I asked. No additional credit without a personal guarantee from Grant or a large equity commitment. And Grant? Robert was quiet for a moment. He believes we should delay payroll and describe it as a processing issue. I looked at the employee count on the report. 837 names. Behind each name was a mortgage payment, a grocery bill, a child needing braces, or a parent relying on health coverage. Executives often speak about payroll as one line on a spreadsheet. I had built a company from nothing. I knew better. Payroll was trust measured every 2 weeks. Once broken, it rarely returned in the same form. I spent the next 48 hours studying Apex Meridian. Carter Ridge Capital assigned analysts to review customer retention, product quality, pending contracts, and operational costs. Rebecca Sloan, then head of regional operations, appeared repeatedly in the reports. She had cut waste without reducing staff and had warned Grant months earlier that his expansion plan was moving too quickly. Her concerns had been ignored. The deeper I looked, the clearer the decision became. The company could survive. The people running it simply needed boundaries they could not talk their way around. On Thursday evening, I met Robert and Michael Reeves in a private conference room near O'Hare International Airport. Rain moved across the windows while airplanes rose into a low gray sky. Robert arrived carrying 3 binders. Michael brought draft agreements. I brought the condition that mattered most. No layoffs connected to this funding, I said. Robert nodded immediately. Michael looked over his glasses. You are prepared to commit $42 million without replacing management, not without protections. The agreement gave Carter Ridge Capital access to financial records, approval rights over major spending, and the option to convert debt into voting shares if leadership violated specific terms. The first $12 million would be available immediately. The remainder would stabilize payroll, insurance, vendor accounts, and operating costs for 18 months. Robert turned to the signature page, then hesitated. Grant will want to announce that he secured this. Let him announce that the company has funding, I said. My name stays out of it. Michael studied me. Why? I thought of Melissa upstairs each morning, preparing to enter a company that might collapse without her ever knowing how close it had come. I thought of the employees whose lives would be disrupted if rumors spread. Because they need stability, not another personality at the center of the story. I signed at 9:32 that night. The following morning, $12 million moved into a protected account controlled by Robert. Payroll cleared on schedule. Health insurance remained active. Vendors received partial payments with written plans for the balance. No employee knew anything had nearly failed. Grant sent a company-wide message praising leadership, resilience, and confidence in the future. Melissa forwarded it to me with a note saying she was proud to work for a man who always found a solution. I read the message at my desk, while the transfer confirmation remained open on the screen beside it. That evening, she came home smiling and told me Grant had saved hundreds of jobs. I placed dinner on the table and asked what exactly he had done. He found an investor, she said. That is what good leaders do. I nearly told her then. Instead, I asked whether she knew the investor's name. She shrugged, reached for the salt, and said, "Does it matter?" At the time, I believed it did not. I thought protecting the company was enough. I did not understand that when decent people leave the truth unnamed, ambitious people eventually put their own names on it. Anonymity had not always been my preference. Before Carter Ridge Capital, my name had been printed on conference badges, business magazines, office walls, and contracts large enough to change the direction of entire companies. I had founded a logistics software firm in my early 30s with 3 engineers, a rented room above a printing shop, and enough savings to cover 4 months of payroll. For nearly a decade, I lived by calendars, airport gates, and quarterly targets. I answered messages before sunrise and carried 2 phones to the dinner table. Success arrived slowly, then all at once. We expanded into 22 states, hired more than 600 employees, and signed contracts with manufacturers whose names appeared on highways and stadiums. People called me disciplined. Investors called me relentless. Melissa called me from empty restaurants and asked whether I was still coming. I usually said yes. Too often, I arrived after the kitchen had closed. The moment that changed me did not happen in a boardroom. It happened in our house on an ordinary Wednesday evening. I came home after 9 and found Melissa asleep on the couch beside 2 untouched dinner plates. A small anniversary card rested near her hand. I had forgotten the date completely. I stood in the dark living room with my briefcase still in my hand and realized I had spent years building security for a marriage I was rarely present to experience. The following morning, I canceled a flight, turned off my phones, and took Melissa to breakfast. I promised her that the company would no longer receive the best part of me while she received whatever remained. At first, I kept that promise. I hired stronger managers, delegated decisions, and stopped treating every problem as proof that I was necessary. 2 years later, a national technology group offered to purchase the company. The price was more than I had imagined when we started above that printing shop. I accepted, retained a limited advisory role, and walked away from daily operations. Melissa celebrated beside me. She said we had finally earned a quieter life. I believed quiet would repair everything noise had damaged. Carter Ridge Capital began with that idea. I could still use what I had learned without allowing work to consume our home. I invested privately, kept a small team, and avoided publicity. There was no nameplate on a downtown tower, no public schedule, and no reason for reporters to call. I could study a company before breakfast, negotiate financing before lunch, and make dinner with Melissa before 6. For several years, The balance felt right. We traveled on weekends. We took long drives along Lake Michigan. We sat on the back porch during summer evenings and talked until the yard disappeared into darkness. When Melissa decided to return to corporate work, I supported her without hesitation. I reviewed her resume, practiced interview questions with her, and introduced her to a recruiter who helped her secure the first role that eventually led to Apex Meridian. Her success never threatened me. I knew how difficult it was to build credibility inside a company. I admired her ambition because I remembered the woman who had once waited beside cold dinner plates while I pursued mine. What I failed to notice was that Melissa had begun measuring work by visibility. A crowded calendar looked important. A private office looked successful. A title announced in a company message looked real. My work happened behind a locked door, without applause or stories she could repeat at executive dinners. She did not see the calls, the risk, or the responsibility. Eventually, she stopped believing they mattered. I could have corrected that misunderstanding at any time. The financial records were not hidden from her. Our accountant sent annual summaries to both of us. Legal documents arrived at the house. I invited Melissa to join quarterly meetings when our estate plan was reviewed. She always declined. She said numbers exhausted her and that she trusted me to handle the boring part of our life. I accepted that answer because trust sounded better than indifference. The truth was simpler. She enjoyed the benefits of my work, but had lost interest in understanding its source. My silence gave her room to invent an explanation that made her feel larger. I did not reveal everything because I wanted one part of my life untouched by wealth. I wanted to know that my wife respected my judgment, my patience, and the ordinary things I did when no one was watching. I wanted the man making coffee in the kitchen to matter as much as the man authorizing millions of dollars downstairs. By the time Robert warned me that Grant was rewriting the company's history, I understood that anonymity had shown me more than I intended to learn. It had exposed Grant's ambition, Trevor's arrogance, and Melissa's need to turn our marriage into a comparison she could win. Still, I was not ready to reveal myself simply to silence a few jokes. Money could end an argument, but it could not restore what contempt had already removed. Then Robert sent me the first internal expense report. Grant had used emergency funds for executive retreats, private travel, and performance bonuses while vendors waited for payment. A second report followed an hour later. Trevor was helping prepare a plan to weaken every protection in my agreement. I read both documents twice, closed my office door, and called Michael Reeves. Staying in the shadows had protected the employees. Now the people standing in the light were using that protection against them. Michael Reeves answered my call from his office in downtown Chicago. He had represented me through the sale of my first company, the creation of Carter Ridge Capital, and every investment agreement signed since. He knew the difference between a poor decision and a deliberate violation. I sent him the expense reports through our secure portal and waited while he reviewed them. The first file showed that Grant had approved an executive retreat at a resort in Arizona less than 3 weeks after requesting additional payroll support. The second included private transportation, upgraded hotel suites, and consulting fees paid to a firm owned by Trevor's college roommate. The amounts were not large enough to destroy Apex Meridian by themselves. That was not what concerned me. Waste was rarely the first problem. The first problem was the belief that no one with authority was paying attention. These expenses may violate the funding agreement, Michael said. The related party contract almost certainly does. What about the restructuring plan? I asked. If they approve it without your consent, they trigger the conversion clause. His answer was calm, but it changed the shape of the situation. The emergency credit agreement had been written to protect employees from exactly this kind of leadership. If Grant attempted to weaken our safeguards, Carter Ridge Capital could convert part of the outstanding debt into voting shares. I would no longer be only the person financing the company. I would become its largest voting shareholder. Do not activate anything yet, I said. I want a complete record. Michael agreed, then advised me to let Robert continue gathering evidence without alerting Grant or Trevor. The next morning, Robert called before sunrise. His voice sounded more tired than usual. He had spent most of the night comparing expense approvals against internal cash forecasts. They postponed payments to 3 software vendors while approving executive bonuses, he said. One of those vendors supports the platform used by our largest client. I stood at the kitchen window while darkness still covered the backyard. Melissa was asleep upstairs. Her work bag rested near the front door, prepared for another day at the company I had quietly kept alive. How much were the bonuses? I asked. $1.4 million combined. And the overdue vendor payments? $960,000. I closed my eyes for a moment. Grant had chosen recognition for 6 executives over stability for a system serving hundreds of customers. Who approved the delay? Trevor recommended it. Grant signed it. Robert paused. There is something else. Marketing is preparing a series of videos for the gala. One of them says Grant personally negotiated the rescue financing. Did Melissa approve that language? Her electronic signature is on the final campaign document. The refrigerator motor clicked off, leaving the kitchen completely quiet. I looked toward the staircase and remembered Melissa telling me that the investor's identity did not matter. Perhaps she had truly believed that. Perhaps she had repeated Grant's version because it made a cleaner story. Intent mattered in a marriage, but consequences mattered too. She had attached her name to a lie that erased mine. Send me the signed file, I said. It arrived less than a minute later. Melissa's approval appeared at the bottom of the page beneath a paragraph describing Grant as the leader who had secured the capital necessary to preserve every paycheck. I read the words slowly. She had not known the investor was her husband, but she had not verified the claim either. She had chosen the version that benefited her career. That evening, I asked her about the gala video while we cleared dinner plates. Grant wants the anniversary to remind people why they trust him, she said. Does the video explain where the emergency money came from? She placed a plate in the dishwasher and gave me a distracted look. Why are you suddenly interested in company financing? I am interested in accuracy. Finance reviewed everything. I knew that was false. Robert had refused to approve the language. Did you ask him? I said. Melissa closed the dishwasher harder than necessary, then folded her arms. Daniel, I do not understand why you keep questioning my work. This campaign is important to me. I am not questioning your work. I am asking whether the story is true. Grant saved the company. Everyone knows that. Everyone repeating something does not make it true. Her expression changed. The warmth disappeared first, followed by patience. You spend your days examining companies from a basement office. I actually work inside one. I think I understand Apex Meridian better than you do. I dried my hands on a towel and looked at her across the kitchen island. 10 feet separated us, but the distance felt much greater. Maybe you understand what they want you to see. She gave a short laugh. This is exactly what I mean. You always need to make ordinary things sound mysterious. Her phone rang before I could answer. Grant's name appeared on the screen. She picked it up and walked into the living room, already changing her voice into the polished tone she used with executives. I remained beside the sink, listening to her praise the gala speech and assure him that the message would present his leadership clearly. The call lasted 12 minutes. When she returned, she did not continue our conversation. She kissed my cheek, said she had an early meeting, and went upstairs. The following afternoon, Robert sent the document that ended my patience. Grant and Trevor had scheduled a private board session for the morning after the gala. The agenda included approval of the restructuring plan and removal of Carter Ridge Capital's consent rights. At the bottom of the page was a note written by Grant. Once approved, the original lender will no longer influence executive decisions. I forwarded the document to Michael. Then I called Robert and told him to prepare every payroll transfer, every expense report, and every authorization bearing my signature. They were not only rewriting the past. They were preparing to take control of the future with money that had never belonged to them. The next 3 days moved with the quiet precision of a clock being reset. Michael reviewed the original funding agreement line by line and confirmed that Grant's proposed restructuring would trigger the conversion clause the moment the board attempted to approve it without Carter Ridge Capital's consent. We did not need to threaten anyone. We only needed to let their own paperwork reveal what they had done. Robert created a secure archive containing every payroll transfer, vendor payment, executive expense, and rejected finance warning from the previous 18 months. Each file carried a date, an authorization code, and a name. The truth was no longer an argument. It was organized into folders. On Monday morning, Michael sent formal notice of a special board meeting scheduled for 8 o'clock on the day after the gala. The notice identified Carter Ridge Capital as the requesting party, but did not disclose my role. Grant responded within 20 minutes. claiming the meeting was unnecessary and disruptive. Michael replied with one sentence. The meeting is required under Section 14 of the credit agreement. Grant did not answer again. That afternoon, I met Robert at a small coffee shop near the Des Plaines River. He arrived in a dark overcoat and chose a table where no one could sit behind us. He placed a flash drive beside my coffee. This contains the payroll record, he said. Every transfer since the first emergency deposit. How many employees know the company was that close to missing payment? I asked. Almost none. Keep it that way. Robert studied me. After the board meeting, that may not be possible. They can know the company received support. They do not need to spend the next month fearing that their jobs will disappear. That had been my concern from the beginning. Grant and Trevor deserved accountability, but the receptionist on the first floor did not. The software engineer with 2 children did not. The warehouse supervisor caring for an aging parent did not. A correction at the top should not become panic everywhere below it. Robert nodded and slid a second document across the table. It listed the voting shares Carter Ridge Capital would receive if the conversion clause became active. The percentage was larger than I had expected. Grant's attempt to remove my influence would give me more authority than I had ever requested. Once Michael files this, Robert said, you become the largest voting shareholder. I folded the paper and returned it to the envelope. Then we need someone prepared to keep the company operating. We both knew who that person should be. Rebecca Sloan had spent 14 years at Apex Meridian. She understood the products, the clients, and the employees. More important, she had warned Grant about the exact problems now threatening the company. He had ignored her because caution did not sound impressive in a presentation. I contacted Rebecca through Michael and asked her to meet us that evening at his office. She arrived at 7:15 wearing a gray suit and an expression that suggested she expected bad news. Michael explained that our conversation was confidential. Robert showed her the delayed vendor payments and executive bonuses. She read every page without interrupting. When she reached the related party contract approved by Trevor, she removed her glasses and looked at Robert. How long have you known? Long enough to document it, he said. Not long enough to stop it alone. Rebecca turned toward me. She knew my name from the meeting invitation, but nothing in her face suggested recognition. What does Carter Ridge Capital want? She asked. A company that can pay its employees without pretending executive pride is a business strategy, I said. If the board suspends Grant and Trevor, would you be willing to oversee operations temporarily? She did not answer immediately. That was one reason I trusted her. People attracted to power usually reach for it before understanding the weight. Rebecca asked about payroll, customers, insurance, and the credit line. Only after Robert confirmed that all 4 would remain protected did she agree. I will do it, she said, but I will not be used as decoration while someone else makes decisions in private. Neither will I replied. For the first time that evening, she smiled. By Wednesday, every piece was in place. Michael prepared the conversion notice, but kept it unsigned. Robert finalized the audit request. Rebecca created a 30-day operations plan without placing my name anywhere in the document. We were not planning a dramatic takeover. We were preparing a stable transition in case Grant forced one. At home, Melissa continued working on the gala as though nothing had changed. She practiced Grant's introduction in the living room, adjusted the wording of his speech, and reviewed slides celebrating executive leadership. One night, she asked whether my dark suit still fit. Why? I said, spouses are invited, and I need you to look presentable. I watched her scroll through seating assignments on her tablet. My name appeared beside hers at the executive table, listed only as Daniel Carter, guest. Do you want me there? I asked. She looked up, surprised by the question. Of course. People expect to meet my husband. Not know him. Meet him. There was a difference. On the afternoon of the gala, a courier delivered the final board package to my office. Inside were the audit request, the voting conversion documents, and 18 months of payroll records. My signature appeared on the last page. Upstairs, Melissa called down that we needed to leave in 40 minutes. I closed the folder, locked it in my briefcase, and stood before the dark monitors. For years, silence had allowed me to protect people without becoming the center of their story. By the end of the next morning, that silence might no longer be possible. I turned off the office light and went upstairs. Melissa was waiting near the front door in her blue evening dress, checking the time with visible impatience. She handed me my coat and said, Please do not make tonight awkward. I took the coat, looked at the woman I had loved for 17 years, and answered quietly. That depends on what people decide to say. The ballroom doors opened at 6:30, and Melissa changed the moment we stepped inside. Her shoulders lifted, her smile sharpened, and the impatience she had carried during the drive disappeared beneath the polished confidence she wore for Apex Meridian. She moved from table to table greeting directors, clients, and board members while I followed half a step behind. Every introduction sounded almost identical. This is Daniel, my husband. Then came the pause. Sometimes she added that I had retired early. Sometimes she said I kept busy with investments. Most of the time, she simply turned back to the person whose opinion mattered more to her. I watched the room carefully. Silver banners hung beneath crystal chandeliers. Waiters carried trays between nearly 300 guests. A company timeline stretched across one wall, showing product launches, office expansions, and photographs of Grant shaking hands with employees. There was no mention of the financial crisis. No mention of the credit line. No mention of the 18 months when every paycheck had depended on transfers authorized from my office. History had already been edited before anyone reached the microphone. Robert stood near the stage speaking with two board members. When he saw me, he gave a small nod. Michael was not in the ballroom, but he waited in a private room upstairs with the conversion documents and the audit request. Rebecca sat near the operations team, calm and observant, dressed as though this were an ordinary company dinner. Only 4 people in the building understood what the next morning might bring. Melissa led me to the executive table and placed one hand on the back of my chair. Try to enjoy yourself, she said. I always do. She did not hear the meaning beneath my answer. Trevor Blake arrived with a bourbon in one hand and his wife beside him. He looked at my plain dark suit, then at Melissa's dress, and smiled. Carter, you clean up well. Melissa must have approved the wardrobe budget. His wife looked away. Melissa laughed. I pulled out her chair before taking my own. The suit is mine, I said. Trevor lifted his glass. That is encouraging. The jokes continued through dinner. He asked whether I had discovered any new hobbies. He offered to introduce me to a friend who needed part-time bookkeeping help. When a director mentioned an early flight, Trevor said I would never understand the burden of a real schedule. Each comment was light enough to dismiss and deliberate enough to establish my place at the table. Melissa never stopped him. She added details. She told them I handled groceries, repairs, and most of the cooking. Those things were true. The contempt in her delivery was not. She presented care as evidence of failure, as though supporting our home had become shameful because I did it without a corporate title. I looked toward Robert after one especially loud round of laughter. His expression had gone still. The leather folder rested on the chair beside him. Grant took the stage after dessert and thanked the leadership team for guiding Apex Meridian through uncertainty. His voice filled the ballroom with practiced warmth. He praised courage, discipline, and the willingness to make difficult choices. Behind him, a video showed employees smiling in conference rooms while bold words appeared across the screen. Stability, vision, trust. Melissa watched with pride because much of the language was hers. Grant reached the section about the company's financial recovery. When others doubted us, he said, this leadership team secured the resources necessary to protect every employee and preserve the future we built together. Applause rose around the room. I did not clap. Robert did not either. Trevor noticed and leaned toward me. Do not feel left out, Daniel. Some people create value, and some people support the people who do. Melissa pressed her lips together, trying not to laugh, then failed. Grant finished his speech and invited senior leaders to stand. Melissa rose beside me as the audience applauded again. Trevor lifted his glass in her direction. To the woman carrying an entire department and apparently an entire household. The people nearest us laughed. Melissa raised her own glass. Someone has to keep the lights on, she said. I felt no sudden anger. Anger would have been easier. What settled over me was colder and clearer. I remembered cold dinner plates from years earlier, the resume I had helped her rewrite, the recruiter I had called, the flowers I had sent when she earned her promotion, and every morning I had protected her company without asking for recognition. None of that existed in the story she preferred to tell. In her version, my silence made me small, and my supposed dependence made her success brighter. I stood slowly. Trevor's grin widened because he expected a reaction he could enjoy. Instead, I adjusted my cuff and looked only at Melissa. The noise around us softened. Do you truly want everyone here to believe that? I asked. Her smile remained in place, but her eyes changed. Believe what? That I have contributed nothing. That everything in our life comes from you. She glanced around the table, more concerned with the audience than the question. Daniel, this is not the place. You made it the place. Her cheeks tightened. I was joking. Do not turn this into something embarrassing. For whom? She stepped closer and lowered her voice. This night matters to me. Please do not damage the image I have built. There it was. Not our marriage. Not the truth. Her image. I looked past her toward Robert. He had opened the leather folder and was waiting beside the stage. Grant was still accepting congratulations. Trevor was watching me with the relaxed confidence of a man who believed the room belonged to people like him. I held Robert's gaze for 1 second, then gave him the smallest nod. He lifted the folder, stepped toward the microphone, and prepared to tell the room whose money had really kept its lights on.